After yet another pathetic defensive performance against the Pittsburgh Steelers in a 30-23 loss last Sunday, the Seahawks have painted themselves into the exact same corner that they did a year ago at this time, facing a must-win situation on the last week of the year in order to stay alive for a playoff spot, and also having to hope for a Green Bay Packer loss just like last year. The Lions took care of business last year, as did the Seahawks. This year, it's the Bears taking on the Packers. Will it happen? Does it matter? That's what I'm going to dig into today. I'm going to focus on three areas where I sense some disconnect, either within the organization, within that football team, or between the football team and the fan base. And we're going to ask some big picture questions about whether or not winning this Sunday even matters. How did we get to this point from a year ago? How does this team compare to that team? What kind of trajectory are they on as they head into this game against Arizona? That's coming up today. You're listening to and watching Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. And Happy New Year. Hope you had a wonderful holiday, got to spend time with loved ones. I did. That's why I have been away. Haven't had a chance to react to the Pittsburgh game until now. Couple of reasons. One is I got some uninterrupted time to spend with my significant other and enjoyed every minute of that. And also needed to recover from a brutal month at work, which culminated in New Year's Eve, which was a late night for me. So I didn't get to watch the game live, at least after the first drive or two, which certainly sent me off to work that night with a bad taste in my mouth, right? Got to rewatch the game, dig into it a little bit. Sometimes it's a little easier to watch a bad game like that when you know the outcome. And in this case, in some ways it was, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. But before we get to that, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, then you never miss new episodes. And it's the best way to support the channel is simply subscribe and comment. Kind of helps things out in the algorithm. If you listen on audio, whichever podcast platform you listen on, and you want to listen to ad-free episodes, you can do that on Spotify. I have a subscription option, and I'm only charging 99 cents a month just to kind of build that from the ground floor. So hello to my subscribers out there. As we get into the off season, by the way, I will do more audio only episodes, some shorter episodes reacting to rumors and reports and things that we're hearing and little daily thoughts that may pop up. And some of those will be made available only to subscribers. So if you want to get in on that, the description will be or the link will be in the description of the YouTube video, as well as the description on the audio podcast. And if you want to support me, you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee or a beer at the link in the description. It's good to be back. It's good to be back on the microphone. It's not great to be talking about the Seahawks as things stand today. Before I get into what I have prepared, it's just in a general sense, I just want to share that this has been one of the most discouraging seasons that I can recall. And I think, and I've talked about this before, but I think it's because it's all relative to expectations, right? There was so much good vibes heading into the offseason after last year, making the playoffs when no one expected them to, finding some success after trading away a franchise icon like Russell Wilson and, unearthing a productive quarterback in his stead and nailing, what looked like another good rookie draft class, and that we were seeing, the seeds being planted for a team that might be entering a window of being really competitive and maybe even a team capable of growing to the point that we didn't just expect a playoff berth, but some damage in the playoffs. One of the big storylines heading into the season in everyone that I talked to, even guests who cover the league don't cover the Seahawks. Even people from the 49ers side of the equation tended to agree. There was a pretty general consensus that the Seahawks had gained some ground on the 49ers. And certainly here we are again, and that isn't the case. And not just that we're scraping to get into the playoffs when just a few short weeks ago, this team was 6-3 in first place in the division. So what? They have lost 5 out of 7 since then. And the 2 wins during that time were last second wins pulled out with long drives to score touchdowns to win games at the end. And then as I was trying to decide what to focus on for this show, because it's 4 days since the game now, so I'm not going to dive into the details of the game so much. I wanted to focus more on some big picture things. I was reading some of the things that other writers were posting, some of the analysis out there. Some really good stuff's been written this week. And then I heard what Pete Carroll had to say, and that did everything. That gave me all the fuel that I needed. And before I get into this, I will preface it by saying, those of you that haven't watched me before or listened to me, I have been one of Pete's biggest supporters over the years, even when things are going poorly. And it's because the things he does well are really important things. And they're the types of things that not every head coach possesses as a skill set. Building culture, right? Building an environment where guys want to come to, want to stay, want to re-sign, want to come back to. Where players speaking glowing terms. Where, the team is connected to the community in a strong way. His philosophies are top notch. And he brought us our first Super Bowl championship ever, right? The equity gained by that has run out. And so I just want to say that I have not been a Pete Carroll basher at all. Some of you have been off that train for 5 or 6 years. Some of you jumped off that train immediately. Some of you jumped off of it in 2014, which is ridiculous. But I try as I focus on how to produce this show and how to speak my voice as a Seahawks fan and as a former journalist and someone who follows the team and has covered the team. And I try to balance those two things, the emotion and the objectivity of it. And what I want ultimately for my football team is to have a chance to win every year and to beat our rivals and to be competitive in our division. If we can just do that, the other things will come. And right now, in a general sense, I don't feel like we're headed towards that. So now let's get in. That I just wanted to say that right at the top, right? I wanted to focus on 3 elements that we're seeing right now and try to tie it into some things that Pete has said. Let's start with running the football, right? And these aren't in order of importance. I wanted to kind of save the best for last a little bit. We're going to start with running the football, right? Because this is something that from the day Pete Carroll arrived, I'll never forget his very first press conference. He pounded the podium and he talked about what a physical football team this is going to be and how everything starts with running the football. And that certainly was the identity of the Super Bowl offenses. Once they acquired Marshawn Lynch, the Seahawks were a team that would punch you in the mouth in the running game, and then they'd hit you over the top with Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin and some of the weapons that they had there with explosive plays and downfield passing. But the Seahawks have become a team that can't run the ball effectively enough to maintain any kind of offensive identity throughout a game, which is why we tend to see these fits and starts. And we see these games where they'll have a good drive or two, and then they'll have some 3 and outs, where they're near the bottom of the league in third down efficiency, but they're near the top of the league in how often they face third and long. And what we saw Sunday was the antithesis of that, the opposite of that. We saw a team come in here to Seattle in the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team who wasn't dominating people, wasn't rolling people. There are questions there. They've fallen short of expectations. Part of their fan base is tired of Mike Tomlin, and they're saying some of the same things there, or they were, that fans are saying about Pete Carroll. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe his message isn't getting through anymore. Well, that looked like a Mike Tomlin team on Sunday. It looked like the kind of team Pete Carroll wants on offense. Pittsburgh, 202 rushing yards to Seattle's 88 on 46 carries. Seattle, 15 carries. Now, Seattle ran the ball effectively when they did. They averaged 5.9 yards per rush to Pittsburgh's 4.4. Pittsburgh just came out initially and dominated, imposing their will on the Seahawks. They look like, and I usually tend to stay away. I don't like this point of analysis that I'm about to give you, because I hear fans say it a lot, and I think it's often lazy analysis. But there is no question that the Steelers played in a way that indicated they wanted that game more than the Seahawks. They played more desperate. They played harder. When I rewatched that game, I listened to part of it on the radio, and I just heard Steve Rabel describing all the missed tackles and Dave Wyman counting 5 missed tackles on a certain play. And it didn't matter who touched the ball. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Harris, the two of them combined for 197 yards and 3 TDs. And so much of that, what I saw on tape, was what I was expecting to see. Yes, there were a lot of missed tackles. There were some pathetic attempts at tackling, but mostly it was those dudes' effort and how freaking hard they ran. And after contact, too. And it didn't matter, which is one of the reasons why Pittsburgh ends up running 71 plays to the Seahawks 49. And this is kind of indicative of and symptomatic of what's wrong with the Seahawks as a whole. And I'll try to tie all this in together. That offensively, we're going to talk about the offense a little bit later, but offensively, there are signs that even despite the fact they can't control the game with their rushing offense anymore, they're still pretty good. The fact that they kept this to a 1-score game is remarkable, and it does speak to certain elements of the offense that we're going to get into. But they're able to keep these games close, most of them, not counting the Ravens and the 49ers. And that's remarkable to me because the Steelers dominated this game physically. They really did. 14 rushing first downs. And for all the things that we saw from the Seahawks defense, poor tackling, terrible gap integrity, right? We see, if you watch our friend of the show, Griffin Sturgeon, Matty Brown, those guys, if you follow them on Twitter, they'll show screen grabs and all 22 stuff that just show blown assignments, wide open holes, huge cutback lanes. So the combination of that and bad tackling is pretty fatal, right? And so when Pete came on his radio show Monday, and I think he repeated some of this sentiment in his press conference yesterday. Oh boy. Some of the things he said were as red as a red flag can get. And I'm just personally tired of it. Where do we start? Let's start here. First of all, he spent significant amount of time talking about how much he loved the running style of Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, how hard they ran, pointed to them as examples about what he wants, the just big physical backs that run with a certain style. Even went back and said, and like the guy we faced last week, Derrick Henry, and basically was describing what he wanted the Seahawks offense to be. And then he wasn't as definitive in throwing these guys under the bus as he was a couple of weeks ago when he talked about Reek Woolen and Jamal Adams after that 49er debacle down there with all the explosive plays and those guys just missing assignments and blowing coverages. Talked about Ken Walker as a guy that's shifty and dynamic and quick. And then he kind of backed off it. And, he talked about how Zach's a little bit bigger and he's in that style, but then he kind of backed off and you could hear him maybe even catch himself and say, but those guys are still developing. Well, look, when we talk about Ken Walker all the time, and we talk about him in terms, if you ever watch some of the live streams during games that Dana O'Gorman and I do on that PSF app, we talk a lot about it, about how, when you watch him, it's a lot of no, yes. It's a lot of bouncing things outside that look like they should be cut up the middle. But he'll do it in such a way to show off his talent and make it hard to not like what he does. In his limited carries Sunday, I think he had 58 yards and a touchdown, a couple dynamic runs, but they were of that variety. Again, well, you're certainly not seeing that from Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. They're running it down your throat. So it pegs the question. I'm not going to dive deep into this. Rob Staten wrote about this on the Seahawks draft blog. I'll have Rob on after the season ends. I've had him on the show a few times. He certainly sparks interest in the comments. Some of you have some very strong feelings about Rob, have accused him of being too negative. I call that objectivity. I think he just isn't afraid to tell what he feels is the truth. And he points out the fact that, for the Seahawks to emphasize the run like they do and spend 2 second-round picks in back-to-back drafts, important drafts on running backs, and then sit here now and tell us that they're not performing the way they should. They're not giving you what you expect from them or want from them, or maybe even implying that they're not the right kind of back, the kind of backs you want. And if Zach Charbonnet, as Pete said yesterday, is that bigger, stronger, more physical guy, then why does he only have 8 touches in the last 3 games? It is a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you have a dysfunctional run game and you're not able to consistently run the ball, then you're not going to be able to sustain drives. You're not going to be as good on third downs. You're going to be behind a little bit more often, which then forces you to throw the ball more. Playing from ahead is the best way to keep the run game going, right? Let's see. I looked at this on Pittsburgh's, by contrast, on Pittsburgh's first touchdown drive, right? 14 plays, 80 yards, 8 minutes. Like that's, if you could draw up a drive, that's what every offensive coordinator, head coach wants. That's the perfect drive. You're controlling the clock. You're being physical. You're wearing down the other team's defense. You're going the length of the field. You're chewing up 8 minutes and you're getting in the end zone. On that drive, they only faced 2 third downs, mostly because of how effective they were running the ball. And both of those were 3rd and 1s. And of their 4 first downs in that drive, 3 of them were runs where they gained 6 or more yards on first down, running the football. That sets up second and shorts, makes it real tough on a defense, makes it easy for a guy like Mason Rudolph, who's been playing well, has probably won that job, moving into the playoffs if Pittsburgh's able to squeak in. Maybe even long-term has raised some huge questions about Kenny Pickett and his tenure there just in his second year after being drafted in the first round. But the effectiveness of being able to run the football on early downs. And then you look at the Seahawks, and some of this is scheme and design. Time and time again, and I've seen some of the analytics, I think they're top of the league in running the football on second down. And it's almost, remember the Mike Holmgren days when it was 3rd and long, everybody in the stadium, we would all turn to each other and go, draw play. Like Holmgren just had this tendency where on 3rd and long, he would just He would play so conservative and he would essentially give up and call draw plays, many of them to Max Strong, which gave you even less of a chance to convert on those. Waldron has a very strong tendency of when first down doesn't go well, when they try to throw on early downs and it's incomplete or they get stuffed on a run, of running on second and long. And I just don't get it. Here's a couple of things that Pete has said about the running game. He spoke very openly about wanting to run the ball more in December of 2021. I want to run the ball more as that season was winding down. I'd like to be the most physical running team in the league. He said that on October 14th of this year. And yet, as I pointed out earlier, Zach Charbonnet, your biggest, most physical back, has 8 touches in the last 3 games during a crucial stretch. And then yesterday he says, when asked about the running game, what he'd like to see out of the running game, his quote was, more, just more. We need more. So we're going on 2 years now of talking about this. And during those 2 years, they've spent second-round picks on 2 different running backs. Red flag numero uno. Now let's talk about the defense. It's worse today than it has ever been under Pete Carroll. The Seahawks have a negative point differential for only the second time in Carroll's tenure. They would have to beat the Cardinals by 39 on Sunday in order to get that back on the positive side. The only other time that they had a negative point differential was that first year when they went 7-9 and won the division before the Beastquake game. And it was bad last year, right? We talked about it. People wanted Clint Hurt fired after 1 year. They wanted Pete fired. They wanted, mass changes. But let's recap. It was bad last year. In 2022, they ranked 26th in points per drive, 25th in EPA per play on defense. So then they go out and they completely change out the defensive line group. They spend money in free agency. They bring in Draymond Jones on the biggest free agent contract that regime has ever handed out. They sign Julian Love, Devin Bush. They bring back Bobby Wagner. They spend 2 draft picks on the defensive line. They spend the number 5 pick in the draft on a corner. And then they trade a second-round pick at midseason for a potential half-season rental of Leonard Williams. They do all that. And they also tweak the scheme. And yet they're worse this year in every category. They are 29th in both of those categories now this year after being 26th and 25th last year. And they're 29th in both categories after a good start. Remember how promising we thought that defense was after 5 games, especially against the run? Since week 7, they're dead last in nearly every defensive category. The Seahawks literally have the worst defense in the NFL with a head coach who is known for defense. Here are some recent quotes from Pete Carroll. We're working on it. We have plans. I can answer that effectively and clearly. We have plans to fix the defense. Okay, Pete, that sounds promising. He said that on September 27th, 2021. Here's another one. We're just going to improve on some stuff. I think that stuff is going to go away. He's talking about missing gaps in the run game. I think we're going to get it done, and we're going to be cleaner and sharper and consistent when we feel where everybody is. We'll max out the opportunities better than we are right now. He said that on October 7th, 2022. We have to practice cleaner, better. There's some things we have to do here, some things we have to do. We'll take care of business. You'll just have to wait and see. He said that on December 11th of this year. That was the coach's show where he got a little defensive with Mike Salk, and when Salk was asking him about leadership, and that was after the 49er game. So he gets kind of defiant, right? And puffed up. You'll just have to wait and see. We're going to fix it. We'll take care of business. Well, that was a month ago. And then yesterday, promising once again they'll get better on defense. And then he followed up his own question. He said, how are we going to do that? And then again, with a little bit of a defiant tone, he said, watch. Just watch. It says they're going to get better at things. How can we believe him anymore? And then maybe the most concerning thing that he talked about was that the reason, and we see this, okay, once again, as they were in Tennessee, as they've been at other times in the second half of the season. They were better in the second half. I think Warren and Harris only averaged 2.8 yards per carry. In the second half, it might have been closer to 2 yards per carry, actually. Might have been 2.1. So they make the adjustments. And when asked about that, Pete said, well, we saw the explosive plays they had last week against Cincinnati, and we were prepared for that. And so he essentially, I'm paraphrasing, he said, we loaded up, or not, loaded up's not the right term. We prepared to stop the passing game, the downfield passing game, and we had a game plan to limit Mason Rudolph and George Pickens and Deontay Johnson, and not the running game. You talk about a disconnect, right? Any team watching the Seahawks on film and the struggles they have against the run is going to come in here and try to run the football, especially when it's the Steelers. And that's your identity. That's what you do. You're playing with a backup quarterback. You have two really good running backs. Of course you're going to run the football. That's where it needs to start. And then it takes until halftime to respond to that. How about after that first drive? Oh, shit. They're going to run it down our throats. Let's change some things. It just rings hollow to me now. It means nothing. What can you do in a week to fix things now against a team that, guess what? James Conner's coming off his best game of the year. He's looking as good as he's ever looked in his career. The Cardinals are going to run the football. And guess what else? Kyler Murray is playing well. And there's talk now that they're going to stick with him. That the assumption this whole season when they handed that thing over to Jonathan Gannon and turned things over again were that, hey, they're going to tank. They're going to tank for Caleb Williams. They're going to move on from Kyler Murray, right? There was some question as to whether they'd even activate him and play him this year. But they're certainly not tanking. And Kyler Murray's playing pretty well. And you have to respect his ability to run. Right? I'm not the only one mad. Do you hear the cat in the background? She's pissed too. This feels like, I've said this before, this feels like the end of the Mike Holmgren era, where the league had adapted to the West Coast offense and his tendencies, had figured out how to slow us down. And Mike was so stubborn that he refused to delegate authority to anybody else, to hand the offense over to anybody else, and he wasn't able to adapt. And when it was over, and they just weren't competitive anymore. And it was time for a change. I said 6 weeks ago, and I got pretty emotional about it because I love Pete Carroll. It just seems like his ability to guide this defense in particular and make the right decisions there has vanished. Isn't there anymore. Are you going to fire another coordinator? Each one has gotten progressively worse, right? All right, we have a cat fight in the back. Did you see that? Wait, if you're watching on YouTube, you might have saw. Well, there's Butch being just a terrorist and terrorizing one of the girls just for fun. I've got evidence of this one. But yeah, Chris Richard inherited some of the Legion of Boom, and that was okay for a while, but there was a disconnect there, and Pete moved on from Chris Richard, even though he was a guy that had been in Pete's program from all the way back at USC, I believe. Then he goes to Ken Norton Jr., and we didn't like those defenses, but would you take one of those now? And that doesn't work out. Norton was another guy with tons of history with Pete. moves on from him, hires Clint Hurt from within, a guy who'd never been a coordinator before, and it's worse than ever. When I think we can all agree the talent, just the pure individual talent of that 11, it's better than it's been for the last 3 or 4 years, wouldn't you say? Like, where is it the most broken? Is it scheme? Is it Pete just not understanding what's going on with offenses in the league? Is it just hiring the wrong guys? Is he meddle too much? Is he not able to hire a strong coordinator, an established coordinator because they want more autonomy? These are questions that we're going to have to ask this offseason, and most importantly, they're questions that Jody Allen's going to have to ask. And now I want to finish up with this. I want to talk about Geno Smith, because I think it ties into all of this in a way. There's a huge faction. It might not be the majority of the fan base, but it's a significant portion of it that just doesn't believe in Geno Smith. And I'm saying everything I'm about to say with, once again, I'll place this in context. I believe the Seahawks need to draft a quarterback. I think they need to do the Green Bay thing and the Kansas City thing and draft a guy, not with the idea that he takes over day one, but that you set yourselves up. And this is the year to do it because it's a really, really exciting quarterback class at the top, and there's some depth to it. And we'll talk about this a lot as we head into the offseason about the idea of, can you get a mid-round guy? And I've played around with some of those scenarios. But I've been pretty vocal that the Seahawks should consider taking a first-round quarterback this year. I'm not so sure as I sit here today, and not just because I think Geno's the man, but because I don't know if they can afford to. Because they're getting beat so badly up front on both sides of the ball. But the point I want to make today is I want you all to think about what Geno Smith has done this year, and in particular the last 2 months. As all of this stuff is falling apart, as the Seahawks defense is going from top 10 and top 5 in running defense, I think they were number 2 in rushing defense after week 4 or 5. And we've seen just a steady decline, right? They can't stop the run. They can't get off the field. They're losing the time of possession battle every single week. The running game isn't able to support him. It's not able to get those chunk yards on first down to put us in second and shorts, third and shorts, give us more opportunities to get the ball downfield. We're playing from behind when the other team knows that they can pin their ears back and come after you. And yet, in the last 2 months, really before, I would say since the second half of the Commanders game, if I went all the way back and looked at it, something clicked for Geno. If you remember my reaction to the Cincinnati loss, I ripped him as hard as anyone. That was a game that we should have won. We had it in hand, and Geno just was bad. First 9 weeks, 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, some questionable decisions, and he was holding on to the ball too long. And it gave fuel to the fire and the argument of all of you anti-Geno haters, for lack of a better term, that, see, told you he was a one-year wonder. He had the great first half last year. His performance diminished as 2022 progressed. And look how he's getting out of the gate this year. He's the guy we thought he was. He should be a backup. He's not a starter. In the last 6 games, Geno's 142 out of 218. That's a 65% completion percentage for 1,633 yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. His average game, if you extrapolate that out, and this includes, his performance against San Francisco, which wasn't great. He only completed 55% of his passes in that game. His average game over that stretch, 24 out of 36 for 272 yards, and then like a touchdown and a half to 0.3 interceptions. He's not turning the ball over. He's making explosive plays. He's been consistent. He's not checking the ball down. He's not dumping it to his running backs and his tight ends. He's making plays down the field, to DK in particular. Their connection has really grown this year. And all those questions about DK a couple months ago and whether the Seahawks should trade him, how do you feel about that now? Like, I feel like DK has stepped up, and that's a topic for another show. He's gotten JSN more involved. The offense as a whole, 10th in the NFL in EPA per play and 12th in points per drive, despite the fact that they're losing time in possession. They can't run the football effectively. They're facing second and longs and third and longs at a rate higher than most every other team in the league, and yet Geno's been that effective. When other teams know that's the only way that the Seahawks can beat you is throwing the football. And if you go back and watch that Pittsburgh game on Sunday, and I did a whole show on this 3 months ago about how good Geno is at manipulating the pocket, sensing pressure, and moving around in the pocket. Not scrambling, not bailing out, but just moving around to give himself a chance. He was masterful at that Sunday. Geno Smith was the best player on the field on Sunday. And I'll say that even above Warren and Harris. Those guys were effective players. They ran hard, but Geno Smith was the best player on the field on Sunday. He's the Seahawks' best player. And so while I still believe it's a really, really smart decision to try and identify a quarterback and take one moving forward, they may not have that luxury because when their pick comes around in the middle of the first round now, they might need to take that offensive tackle to make their offensive line better. A group that we thought was going to be really good this year, and they're not. And now Abe Lucas once again having to leave with a knee injury, and that knee injury is so mysterious. And, Pete said earlier in the season that it's not a surgical thing. So they try the injection. It takes him 2 months to come back, and he still doesn't have the strength to push off of it. They got to identify that and fix it. Maybe it's degenerative. Maybe it can't be fixed. Maybe he's one of those guys that's a one contract guy. You got to think about that. You got to think about your interior offensive line. You have some free agent issues there, some contractual issues with Damian Lewis and Evan Brown. Are those guys good enough? Because the results aren't there. So you might have to take a tackle in the first round, or depending on how things fall. And unfortunately, it's not a great interior defensive line draft, at least not at the top. But if one of those guys falls, you might have to take that guy because they absolutely have to get better up front. And certainly this is something we can't really talk about today. A lot of this will depend on a regime change, right? If Carroll's out, if Carroll and Schneider are out, is a new regime going to want to lean a little heavier into the quarterback idea? But if you don't like Geno Smith, you better get used to him, because if Pete Carroll sticks around, at least for another season, Geno's the guy. He's been really good. And I would argue that if you don't think Geno's good, try to find some evidence. Try to back up your argument, because you're not going to be able to find it. Watch the tape. Watch the damn tape. It's fun to see, because just one of my favorite things to watch in all of sports, baseball, football, doesn't matter, is to see players develop, to see players take a leap. And it's maybe even more satisfying to see what Geno's done. After all the years of waiting, right? We know the story. But then he's kind of had to come back again. Because heading into this year, he had so many doubters, even after what he had done last year. And then after the first half of the season, he had more doubters. So for him to bounce back again and change his game, gets rid of the ball quicker, is more decisive, taking shots down the field, being more aggressive, really leaning into DK Metcalf. It's been, to me, as fun to watch as his story arc was all of last season. But the discouraging part of that is that, as I was arguing a couple months ago, that I even did a mock draft with Michael Thompson, right? That the Seahawks have to take a first-round quarterback next year. And don't hold me to any of this. I still may, when I study these guys some more and see how the draft falls and see what other moves they might make in the offseason, that that it still might be the best thing for them to do, that I am more confident in Geno Smith today than I ever have been, to be honest. He's the one player that gives us a chance to win every week. If we win Sunday, whether we make the playoffs or not, it'll most likely be because Geno played really well. His ability to adapt and grow again, credit to the staff, right? Those guys for getting through to him and for him seeing that and being willing to change and open to change. But it'll be a fascinating storyline heading into the season. A couple other little newsy, notey things this week. Pro Bowl bids. Cool to see Devin Witherspoon make the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Julian Love, that was kind of a surprising one, right? That he gets voted into the Pro Bowl. And then Bobby Wagner for, I think, the 11th time in his career. It's cool to see, but do you care about the Pro Bowl anymore? Not just because they don't play the game anymore, and because even when they did play the game for the last 10 years or so, it was just a joke, but because the voting process, I just can't take it seriously. I just can't. Like, Michael Dixon hasn't made a single Pro Bowl since his rookie year. There's other examples. If you want to see how ridiculous the whole selection process is, just go look at Budda Baker's stats from this year and Antoine Winfield Jr.'s stats at safety, and Budda Baker made the Pro Bowl and Winfield did not. Figure that out. Like, it's bad. And then, and this is a topic we'll talk much more about as we get into the offseason, but Bobby Wagner definitively this week said that he wants to continue playing. Now, if you remember, when he re-signed here, he talked about, he said two things. He said, Seattle, for the rest of my career, this is the only place I want to play. And also that it'll be 1-year deals from here on out. I'll judge each and every year going into the offseason whether or not I want to play another year. He was asked yesterday if he wanted to keep playing, and he said 100% yes. I'll have more thoughts on this in a few weeks, but right now it made me cringe a little bit because it might potentially put the Seattle organization in a really tough spot and kind of paint them into a corner of having to be the bad guy again for the second time in Bobby's career. Because even though he's racked up a bunch of tackles this year, made the Pro Bowl again, there are still times where teams pick on him in coverage because he just doesn't have the explosiveness that he used to have. So, is there a way you can protect him? Is there a way you can improve that defense personnel-wise so that Bobby fits into it, or devise a scheme that allows him to fit? Or is he willing to take a reduced role, not be a 3-down linebacker anymore? How much is it going to cost? All those things. But I found that to be interesting, especially given the fact that the season's not over yet. So just wanted to give my initial thoughts on that. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Again, subscribe to the channel and the audio podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I'll hop back on tomorrow and do a proper look ahead to the Arizona game and how these two teams might match up. Cardinals playing well. I mean, I said after the game on Sunday, I said to some people, like, we're not going to win on Sunday. I don't see us beating the Cardinals the way we're playing right now. And again, that breaks my heart, because one thing that I've always said and always believed is that you could throughout his career, you could almost trust Coach Carroll to get a team ready to play more coming off a bad performance than a good one. Like, he'll figure out a way. Just when you count them out, they'll come back. I don't know, because we've been thinking that all year and we haven't seen it, right? So sorry about all the negativity. Just trying to speak my truth and what I see with my eyes and my head and my heart, and try to balance it all and put it together. Thanks for watching. Thank you for supporting the show. Again, Happy New Year. And we'll see you Sunday after the game. I will be reacting to that game. It is Sunday. They finally set that kickoff time. Sunday, not Saturday. And I'll be here to break it all down with you. And we'll know by then if the Seahawks are a playoff team or not. We'll certainly talk about that. We'll see you tomorrow, though, for a preview of the show. Until then, I am Dan. Thanks for watching. Forever and always, go Hawks.